Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Roger Strukhoff, the director of something we call the Tau Institute. I'm coming to you today from the edge of Chicagoland, and we have offices in other parts of the world. We're focused on IT research, especially the dynamics of organizations and nations. So thanks for joining us here. Thanks for joining me at With the Best. I'm going to talk today about the Zettastructure and what it means. In addition to my role as executive director of the Tau Institute, I wear a few other hats. I'm director of research for a software company in Silicon Valley, and I do a lot of conferences where I'm the conference chair or co-chair on topics involving cloud computing and IoT and big data and AI and everything that it entails. So over the course of any year, I get exposed to a lot of different things. So today what I'm going to present to you about the Zettastructure is a very high level view. And any of these slides are something where I could have added 100 things and we could jump down a hole and have a great discussion. But I wanted to give you the really big picture in the hopes that it can inspire you to go out and conquer. Occasionally I'm going to look down and mess with my phone to make sure everything is working okay there. Now, the reason I'm doing this is I think we need to try, when we can, to take a very long view of things. It's difficult. On Monday, most of us go back to work. We have a boss. Even if we are the boss, we have customers. So we all have bosses. And we get tied up in the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, year-to-year planning, and for us to be able to look out 2 or 3 years is about as far as you can go. And of course, the industry is changing so quickly that that can be a problem as well. But today, let's sit back for a few minutes and see what we can do on the bigger picture. The Zettastructure comes from the word zettabyte. What is a zettabyte? A zettabyte is 10 to the 21 bytes, or 1 million petabytes, or 1 billion terabytes, and it's the amount of information that flowed across the internet in 2016. And we can expect at least that much in 2017, and actually, according to projections, I've seen maybe about 25% more than that. In addition to that, what's just flowing across the internet, there's another 7 bytes that were created last year in 2016 and handled internally. They may have been within data centers. It can be stuff that you're creating on your own that you don't necessarily email or stream anywhere. It's a lot of information. 1 million petabytes is a lot of data. No matter if you've been in the industry for 2 years or 30 years, you know that's a lot of information. So what is the Zettastructure? Here's a chart from Cisco that shows the amount of zettabytes that we're creating per year. This is worldwide over the last 5 years, and you can see as far as creating the data, we've been in the Zettabyte era for several years now. Fun fact, useless trivia. With the 7+ zettabytes, that's equal to 1 terabyte per person in the world. I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of information. I have a terabyte drive on my little laptop here. I haven't filled it. You know, it seems like a lot of personal information for me. I haven't come close to filling it. But when it comes down to the amount of information data that we're creating and sending, that's a scale that we're looking at. And of course, we're just getting started. According to Cisco, and I've had this confirmed from different research I've done in other sources, data is growing at about 25% per year. And in fact, according to Cisco, the mobile component of that is growing at about 63% per year. So it's doubling every 2.8 years. Run the numbers in 20 years. At this rate, we're going to reach 1,000 zettabytes, which is already been named. It's called a yottabyte, 10 to the 24th power bytes. And then if you really want to think big term, 100 years out, at that growth rate, because of the wonders of exponential notation, it's easy to figure. It goes to 10 to the 36, which is 1 trillion yottabytes. And again, these numbers I think we can only understand abstractly. We have no name for 1 trillion yottabytes yet. Someone will come up with one someday, but we don't have it. If you use flash storage, if you had 1 trillion yottabytes that you had to store using flash, it would cover 618 million cubic miles, which is equal to having a 1 mile high building. And that's a 5,000 foot building. Tallest buildings in the world are, what, 1,000 feet, except for the one in Dubai, which might be 2,000. So you have a 5,000 foot building covering the entire surface of 11 times the Earth. That's how much data we're going to be creating 100 years from now. Fortunately, 100 years from now, technology advances. We've been looking at different ways of organic storage for years and years, DNA storage, molecular, atomic, however you want to look at it. Hand wave, they'll figure it out. And that amount of storage, 100 years from now, will cover about 200,000 acres. So they'll handle it. Now, what's some of the drivers of the zettabyte? Where is all this stuff coming from? Here's an interesting chart from XO Communications. And, you know, as you might expect, a lot of it's mobile. If you've been around for a while, you remember an age when we didn't have a lot of mobile, a lot of video files, but we thought that that's what's going to really start eating up the bandwidth and the storage and the processing power. In fact, that's what's happened. And so it's, I said a lot of mobile, which is true. What I meant to actually say, it's a lot of internet video. And a lot of that video is mobile. Now, we know that any given night, Netflix, you know, uses something like 40% of the bandwidth in the US during certain primetime hours. So this is skewed. This is a big number, but there are a few active players that are chewing up a lot of it and these massive file sizes, which is something to remember. Still a lot of information, but it's not evenly distributed. So because of this challenge, though, of the vastly growing data, and you look at what's already been done as far as infrastructure by Netflix, by Google, by Yahoo, by Facebook, by eBay, and then a lot of other companies that are fairly intense users of data. From your perspective, just assume the infrastructure will be there. Unless you're in the data center business, and I speak at a lot of data center conferences and we dive down into those holes, but if you're not in that business, just assume the infrastructure is going to be there. Don't worry about the zettabyte. Don't worry about the yottabyte. It's interesting conversation, but it's not really something that you need to worry about. The questions that you need to worry about are, how much data do you have? How much data do you have? And these questions may seem simple, but they're very difficult to answer. How fast is it growing? And how is it growing? And what data types? And where is it coming from? And how much is coming in? And how much is going out? And there's all sorts of questions within those questions. And the biggest question of all is, why does this matter? You need a strategy. You need to have a strategy. I mean, it's fun to have all this stuff coming in and you're wildly, you know, like bailing water out of the boat on a day-to-day basis. But what are you going to do with it? And my opinion, which is certainly shared by a lot of people, not an original opinion, is you need to think about digital transformation. Now, again, whether you've been around 2 years or 30 years, but particularly if you've been around a long time, you get tired of the buzzwords. There's a lot of buzzwords. Everywhere you hear there's something new terminology you got to learn. But the fact is that they're not all just nonsense. Digital transformation to me is not nonsense. Fortunately, we've come up with this clever mnemonic for it, DX, which kind of looks like digital transformation. A lot of people are using that term for shorthand. And in fact, I'm part of a show that's launching next year in Dubai that's focused on DX. I kind of like it because it's got that geeky calculus thing to it. So it brings us back a little bit to the science of doing all this. In my opinion, taking a lot of different ways of looking at it, digital transformation is the application of digital computing software in all aspects of an enterprise to bring about a metamorphosis that allows the enterprise to remain alive. Last word is charged. I'm saying you want to remain alive, implying that you could be dead. And I use the word metamorphosis because I think it resonates more deeply in the English language to us. It's a direct translation of transformation, but I think we go to the Greeks and the metamorphosis, and it instantly puts into our heads, I think, what we're really talking about. And this, of course, is what we're talking about, metamorphosis. Now, those of you who know more about this stuff than I do, I've never actually known if the caterpillar dies and then turns into a completely different animal, or if the metamorphosis brings along the same brain. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it does, but we do know that this creature is born, it does stuff, it eats a lot, it goes to sleep, and it turns into that. And so there's a continuous cycle of life. This is the metamorphosis. Not that there's anything wrong with caterpillars, and that one's a particularly beautiful one, but the reality is you got to be able to fly today. You have to. So as far as you get to your digital transformation, why do I say that? I think a lot of you may be familiar with this this little fun fact that only 12% of the Fortune 500 companies from 1955 were still in the Fortune 500 in 2015. And of the 88% that were not in the Fortune 500 60 years later, most of them are dead. A lot of them were consolidated, they were bought out, but when you're bought out by another company, it means another company has a bigger vision. So only 12% of the Fortune 500 companies from 60 years ago were still around. And we can expect that sort of disruption, for a lack of a better word, that sort of change to continue. Why not? Here's a list. And again, my slides will be available to everybody. I think the show folks have told you that. All of our slides will be available. Here's a list of them in the ones that made it from 55 to well, it says 2016 here, but close enough. And you can see there's some basics. There's some evergreens that managed to survive, but certainly you look at United States, U.S. Steel, that one had a very difficult life the last 60 years. You know, some of these big industrial companies have had real trouble surviving over the years. And this list, of course, this is the 55 list. What have they been replaced by? They've been replaced by the Googles and the Facebooks, and more important, Apple, Microsoft. IBM is there, and Cisco has joined them. And then a lot of these purely data-driven companies have joined them. So we go back to this. Here's a definition I came up with from Gartner, and you probably all know Gartner. Gartner's definition says that digital transformation supporting, need a little editing there, but that's what they said, supporting senior business stakeholders such as CEOs, CEOs, chief marketing officers, and other business leaders. They actually should have included the board of directors in there. Very, very, very high level. The whole point of digital transformation is to support the business at the highest level. It has nothing to do with technology per se. And so therefore we get down to what people think the topic of these talks should be, which is what I call the tools and tactics. Cloud computing, big data, Internet of Things, which is purportedly the topic of this whole track, cognitive and everything that goes with it, and blockchain, which you've probably heard about. We have to remember that digital transformation is a strategy, and cloud and everything else are tools and tactics. You may have a cloud strategy in terms of, should we go public, should we go private, should we go hybrid? But at the end of the day, the cloud is just a tool. It's not going to bring around about transformation on its own. And so I put in parens here some of the subtopics within all of these. Again, with cloud computing, public, meaning Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google, excuse me, a lot of other companies out there. Private, meaning what they call on-premises, or it could be co-located, someone else may be running it, but it's your own private cloud. And there's a lot of technical debates about what really constitutes a private cloud. A lot of different ways to go, but cloud computing is going to be one of the tactics you're using. Only 15% of workloads have gone to the cloud so far, and I think that over time we got to get up to 100%. I think we will. Big data. I have something I call little big data, which comes from all of these sensors. If you think of an Internet of Things thing that has a lot of sensors, or For example, there's a utility in Seattle that has 400,000 meters hooked up to it. My company, day job at El Toros, we work on a little big data project in the healthcare business with a lot of devices pumping out little signals every few seconds. They add up. A 10K signal adds up when it comes out many times a minute by hundreds of thousands of devices. And then there's other types of big data. There's original engineering challenges having to do with design and meteorology and epidemiology. And there's all sorts of varieties of big data. There's no strict definition, but I think it's you know it when you see it. You know it when you have what looks like a lot of data to you. IoT, a couple of the main movements have to do with Industry 4.0, which is actually a real term in Germany that we borrowed for the rest of the world. It has to do with modern industrial manufacturing, 3D printing, and all the asset is in the data, not actually the things produced per se. And then the whole smart city, smart nation, smart grid movement, which is a whole separate thing that involves everything from traffic flows to a lot of public services to over time a lot of different monitoring, and we would hope non-police state top type monitoring. And I'm already getting a question about classification of data. Do I have suggestions for it? Yes, I do, and I just don't have time to get to it today, but I'd be glad to engage with anyone about that in the future, because the classification is basic inventory of what you have and how to classify it. It's like one of the first steps you have to take, and it will be tedious. Cognitive, everything has to be smart today, whether it's a task, recognizing patterns, forget, you see all these demonstrations of AI recognizing a cat. Well, it has to recognize a lot more than that. And then systemic AI, which is the scary stuff, has to do with robots, has to do with massive grids that seem to get smarter over time. You need to have everything that you're doing that's running along the internet somehow, in some fashion, get smarter over time, be more automated. It's just going to produce a lot more benefits, in my opinion, to your organization. And the jobs that the people that are required to manage this will all have very good jobs. Blockchain, the reason I throw that in there is that there's kind of two areas right now of blockchain. Transactions, it's nice for transactions, and the Bitcoin world, the transactions are just selling Bitcoin. And the thing about those transactions, if you dive into blockchain, is they are immutable, they are unchangeable. The other thing that's emerging with blockchain is to actually have contracts and records on the blockchain. And again, you look into the science of it, they are unchangeable. And they can, I think over time, are going to provide great value. Good example that people like to cite, in the year 2008 and 2009, when we had this meltdown in our banking system, the reason we did is suddenly the big banks didn't want to lend money to each other, because I'm sitting at one, I know how exposed I am, and I'm in a lot of trouble. And I'm assuming that you're just as exposed or maybe worse. And if it's worse, I don't want to give you 5 cents because I don't think I'm going to get it back. And you're thinking the same thing about me. And we're not going to show each other. We're actually restricted by a lot of rules to show each other our relative positions. So the whole thing just froze up. If all of our transactions and positions were on the blockchain, and blockchain just contains metadata, not the actual data, and you can get in there, have a disinterested third party get in there and look, then that knowledge would have come out about the relative positions of the banks without giving away specific customer information. Just would have let you see where they stood financially. And the hypothesis there is that the system would not have melted down. So anyway, these are all the tools you can use. Each one of them merits a very long discussion. Companies today are data-driven. That seems to go without saying, but we need to say it a lot. I could give you 100 examples. The one I'm giving you here is Ford, and there's a link there. A nice quote, actually it's a story about they fired the CEO, and he had been talking about how data-driven Ford was for a long time, not only in the semi-autonomous vehicles, but just generally speaking, the design and the way they looked at things, and he wasn't aggressive enough, so they got rid of him. Nike doesn't make shoes anymore. Yes, they're a product of all their data, and they collected all the athlete data and the 3D printed prototypes, to build designs, and maybe someday they'll make a special shoe for you and me, and maybe I can make the Olympic team someday after all. That comes a long way if you know the original Nike story, where he designed the bottom of the shoe with a waffle iron. So Nike tells them, the world, that we're a data company, and hundreds of very major companies will tell you the same thing. So what's your purpose? Want more customer sales, more customers, new markets, new products? So you need to pivot or make multiple pivots. A lot of companies do that. They end up doing something that they weren't doing 20 years ago. It's the only way that they survive, and maybe that's what you need to do if you can, again, leverage your data. And how are you going to measure the success? That's a key thing. Before I go a little further on that, I want to just, make the note that data is agile, but data is agile. Buildings and stuff are not. That's not to say that you can't have buildings and stuff, but the data's agility is what makes it so valuable as things relentlessly transform. And the more that you rely on your data, the more agile, the more quick you can be, and outfox your competition, get into new places. And we actually need kind of new accounting. There's no accounting for really the true, value of data. A lot of it's considered to be intangible or goodwill, and in fact, it's the stuff that provides value. Again, I could give you hundreds of examples. Here's a real simple one. United Airlines, our favorite whipping boy, is worth $20 billion market cap, more or less. Facebook's at $500 billion. There's a bunch of examples, like one a little hard to read, but it shows the relative stock price growth over the last 5 years, and the one that's separating itself from the pack is Facebook, and then there's United, which is cruising along. And United has actually done as well as it can do over the last few years, but Facebook really outpaced it, and you can make lots and lots of charts, again, showing the value of the data-driven companies. Thoughts: it doesn't matter if we don't like this. Again, if you've been around a while, doesn't matter. We need to stop complaining about, well, why is Facebook worth so much, etc. It is. We have to think data first in all of our organizations, even if we have a lot of stuff. Again, not saying you get rid of it, but you have to think data first. What is the data that allows you to make what you make or offer what you offer, and look for new customers and more business from the customers you have. Most people, when they talk about IoT, they talk about cloud, they talk about different technology, they say start small, and I disagree. My advice is to go large. Now, it's easy for me to sit there and say that, but in the companies that I work for, I am pushing for that. And what we've found, again, as Director of Research with Altoros is the name of the company in Sunnyvale that I work for. What we've found within our world and the world of the companies we exist with, about 80% of proofs of concept and minimum viable products just die on the vine. Yeah, it's nice, it works on the laptop, that's cool, ain't that something? And then they just die because there was no huge vision behind it. So you gotta, in my opinion, gamble big, and you gotta think in the long term, which again is very, very difficult. But you gotta think 3 years out, 5 years out, 20 years out, and 60 years out. And if you can do that and you're successful, maybe after you're gone and everyone's sad, you can have a statue for yourself or something, or they'll name something after you. But seriously, you really need to think that way. And you can imagine that you look at the groups of companies that are still here after 60 years or even longer, they had people thinking that way. You know they did. And you want to, in your mind, and everyone that you work with, let them know that you want to be among the 12%. You don't want to be in an 88% that's dustbin of history many years from now. You want to be in that 12%. But how do you measure DX? So you go large, you go aggressive, you use all the tools. How are you going to measure this? And I've thought I'm actually working on a project so we can have kind of a meter where you set what's your goal for percent migration to the cloud. And the reason you want to do that is because it's efficient. The cloud computing does have a lot of efficiency once you drill down into it that simply doesn't exist with legacy systems, proprietary systems either. The amount and percent of data growth. That's important. That shows you're focused on it. If you're going to be data first, data driven, it means that you're probably going to generate a lot of new data. So that shows your focus. Set an aggressive goal. New AI insights. This is improvement. What the Japanese call Kaizen. We can do the same thing, continuous improvement. And if you think of AI as something that gets smarter and continuously improves your processes, rather than a robot that wants to kill you, you can, I think, benefit from thinking about AI and what it can do for you. And the use of blockchain, I think, is truly going to be transformational over time. Again, it certainly would have avoided I think it would have avoided the problems we had in 2008 and 2009. Blockchain is threatening utter disruption of industries. There's people I work with, they're working on different types of new insurance, for example. And by the way that they're doing it, they're threatening to disrupt the entire insurance industry of $5 trillion globally. Again, this is a huge discussion I'd love to have with anyone who's interested. And then another way to measure it is the number of employees that you have and what do they do. What do they do is what's important, what I call Q sector jobs, and I've helpfully provided a link there. That I wrote a story a year ago about Q sector jobs. You have your primary, your secondary, and your tertiary segments of the economy. Primary being farming, minerals extraction, secondary being manufacturing, tertiary being services. So it's not like tertiary meaning unimportant, it's just third. Tertiary being services. Go on beyond that to what we call quaternary and quintary or quinary. The Q sectors, the fourth and fifth sectors, those are the so-called gold collar jobs. Those are the right now you have them in the forms of doctors and lawyers and super professionals. This is what's going to emerge in tech as well, as these Q sector jobs. And educate your people, educate yourself. These are good jobs no matter where they're going to be located. And I would encourage people not to focus on ROI. I'm just talking to a post and no one's going to follow that, but I hate this focus on ROI. It's not ROI. It's not the return on investment. It's overall long-term effect on your revenue and your profitability, your market cap, wherever it is that you're trying to go. And yes, you can tie that back to ROI, but I think of going back to the slide before and focusing on those things is much more enlightened. And then I'm running out of, I got a little bit of time left. This is the part where I pivot. For those of you that are really interested, what I've been doing at this Tao Institute for the last few years I have my assistant here in Illinois, and I have full-time people in Asia and many colleagues throughout the world, is measuring transformation on a global scale, on a national scale. And the way to do it is we have technology factors, which are listed there. We have socioeconomic factors, which are listed there. The hypothesis is that the more income disparity, the less benefit that the technology actually does. We have hundreds of other factors that we include in these algorithms. And the main thing that we do is what we're trying to do as a service is help people locate where they want to put their people, where they want to find their customers, where they want to find their partners. There's skills involved. In each nation, you're looking at what are the skills, infrastructure, logistics, back and forth, and of course the governments and legal codes are very, very important. And so we try to measure this with an index. And what we do is measured on a relative basis. So this insight kind of came from the idea that if you look at what's going on in the world economy the last few years, China and Mexico sometimes seem counterintuitive. China is a long ways away. Why is it such a importance to us? Because they're brutally focusing on price, I guess. And Mexico, with its legal code and complications, they don't seem like the ideal places that you'd want to go, but they've been talked up a lot, and Mexico does benefit from NAFTA as well. And what factors matter in terms of investment? If you look at investment flows, a lot of money goes to Indonesia and these other BRIC companies, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, and China. And this seems counterintuitive to me too, because if you look at government corruption, stability, environment, most of those countries do not do well in any of those categories. So we're looking at everything on a relative basis. The idea is many years ago, when I got an iPad for my spoiled teenage kids, nice, they liked it. But someone that got an iPad for their kids in, say, the Philippines, much bigger impact. The technology cost the same, made a much bigger impact. So we measure things on a relative basis and kind of go from there. Got the algorithms. We use differential calculus. We plot the derivatives. If you get to the third derivative, you're measuring the pace of change, which is like the immediate dynamics. So you can see how these nations are evolving like in real time is the way that we're looking at it. And all of our algorithms can be tweaked depending on what very particular focus someone wants to look at. So our results are not the usual results that you get. The usual results that you get show rich countries at the top and poor countries at the bottom. Ours is much different because we're showing sort of pound to pound, pound per pound ranking. How are they doing relative to how well you think they should do? And we do have categories by income tiers and regions as well, so you can compare apples to apples within our rankings as well. There's a nice thing I did with TIBCO Spotfire a couple years ago. It shows how the rankings are distributed. You want to move up, that's good. And you want to move to the right, that's good. So these are the most, the better ones. A lot of these are very dynamic countries in Eastern Europe and Asia. This is Africa, Latin America. But the reality is the United States doesn't do that well either. The US is like there, right in the middle of the chart. So to be a little more fair, another look that we take is looking at the immediate change. And the immediate change gives you a real good idea of where countries are going to be, say, 5 years from now. And to the right is good. Up is okay, but it's more important to be the right on this chart. And these are the African countries, and they're really going off well. This outlier here, the little blue square, is Vietnam, which is phenomenal by any measure, even though it's a communist government. As far as the way they've worked out licensing technology and the things that are happening in the economy and socioeconomic growth, it's the place to be. So here's some of our leaders. Here's some of our laggards. Leaders have a higher percentage of the Zettastructure than you might expect. It's not just a percentage of GDP, not just a percentage, that some of them are doing much better relatively than others. Kenya has just emerged over the last year. Kenya was actually not doing that well 5 years ago. It is now. Vietnam, Chile. In the more developed world, the Netherlands is outstanding. Canada does very well relative to North America and relative to the United States. Hate to say it, but our algorithms don't have opinions. We do the best we can to make these things factual, and the U.S., frankly, is not doing as well as it should, as are a lot of countries that are highly touted. So the recap is data drives everything. It's big and it's relentless, not going to change. So for you, after you talk about the sheer amount of data, what does the Zettastructure mean to you? What it means to me is that top two things: data drives everything. It's big and relentless. Determine what you're going to do about it. Think big and long-term and global if you can. I still think I can change the world. That may be very presumptuous of me, but that's what I think. And if you do, be happy to engage anyone down the road. I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes that I have left. And you can see my Twitter handle there, IoT2040. I'm presuming I'll be around the year 2040. I think it's going to take that long for us to see a real global impact with the Internet of Things and everything that can do. These are the different hats that I wear. The Tau Institute, like I said, down below, we've got offices in different parts of the world. through Altoros and through DCD Converge and through Cloud Expo, these different hats I wear, you know, I've got colleagues all over the world. I'm going to guess that the same is true of you. We live in, I wouldn't call it borderless, but it's fascinating that there's talent all over the world, and through the wonders of the internet, we're able to reach it and do the best that we can with it. Now, I can go back to, I've got this question of suggestions for classification of data. Again, it depends on your organization. Look at data types, start, like, you know, simple extensions. How much of that are you getting? How much of it is video? How much of it, and then after that, how much of it is mobile? What it is that you're doing? What places do you need more data? Would you like to generate more data? And I can engage with you on that later. It's going to vary by organization. There's no single way to go about this. I think the thing is, we all know that you can go to a conference and hear people talk about how great technology is and how wonderful it is. And here we are in the year 2017. I'll look over at I still use a printer, a scanner sometimes, you know, and some days I can't get that thing to work. So we still get stymied by the kind of day-to-day realities of stuff. And so in your organization, it's going to be a long, tedious task to figure out exactly what data you have and what you want to do with it. And it needs a lot of buy-in, top to bottom. And it's best if you can be in a leadership position where you can drive this. But if not, you work with your colleagues, you try to drive it up, and you try to learn more about, again, the organizations that are succeeding. We're not all going to be Facebook or General Motors, you know, or anything, either of those types of companies. But within our own little spheres, we should be able to be the best that we can be. There's a, how do you store this stuff? That's the question I was waiting for, and I got about 3 minutes to answer it. Safely, you got me. It doesn't seem like anyone's got that figured out. Security audits are very, 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 very important. Depending what you mean by storing it. If you're archiving stuff, you know, you can actually take the step of taking it off the internet. But if you're trying to data mine stuff or form data lakes and find insights from it, it's got to be exposed somewhere. There are 100 security experts will give you 100 different viewpoints. And it's the basic principle of the more secure that you're going to make your data, the more cumbersome the processes are going to be, and the more you're going to impede the rapid flow of it. I think that you can't treat all data the same, and not that you want to get cavalier about this stuff, but some of it's more important than others. I was thinking like an IoT thing. If you got these little beepers that are monitoring traffic and cranking out, you know, traffic reports every 10 seconds, I don't care if someone intercepts that. You know, it doesn't need to be as protected as it does to be back at the source. There's no great answer to that. Again, the better, more paranoid security experts are going to end up slowing you down, and there's a big trade-off. That said, how can you be as irresponsible as these people at Experian were? I mean, you have a feeling sometimes at the high level they're not too far away. How do you think the role of data lake? Yeah, in the future, they're absolutely important, you know, and they've already gotten new nicknames: data oceans and data rivers and data lake. Is it unstructured data? Is it structured data? What kind of insight are you trying to get? I guess what I'm saying is you look at things from the inside out or the outside in. And a lot of people will tell you, you got to look at it from the inside out. But I think in the end, what I'm advocating here is looking at things from the very high level first and from the outside in. This is what we want to achieve. These people are achieving that, our competition, or they're not achieving that, and we want to. So how do we go about that? Rather than let's collect all the data we have and figure out what we can do with it. I think what you do is you have to have a vision first, and then see what you have and what you can do with it relative to what you want to do with it, and then go from there. And it's going to take time. I mean, at cloud, we like to talk about, oh, you can provision in seconds instead of weeks, and you can get, you know, this and that and this so fast. But the reality is to digitally transform your organization is going to take time. So you have to set a time frame, and you also have to set a vision that's going to go out decades and really make people aware of the fact that it never changes. You know, the butterfly, I guess, has the advantage of once it's a butterfly, it's cool, but the butterfly does not live forever. What's important is the species, and the species in turn, some of the species do live forever, and the reason that they do, of course, is because they evolve. And actually, there's a very interesting book, and there's a Dr. Wilson, I think, was about the speciation, and I can't remember the name of it now, but you can look for it, and you really see how nature has a way of constant change. Nature is violent and changeable. The business world is the same way, and that's all I can say is, you know, look from the outside in. That's how I would do it. Thanks a lot for joining me today. I look forward to engaging with all of you down the road. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you very much to the organizers of the conference. Thank you, I said it. Thanks to the organizers for having me.